friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Car Critters Christmas add-on, Car Critters Road Trip add-on, and Merry Mice. So I have stamped all the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with the car, and I wanted to go with some dustier blue shades, so I picked B91, B93, B95, and B97. So I'm taking that B97 first and adding some shadows wherever I think they should go. I put it on the sides of the roof, on the bottom edge of the mirrors, and then on the bottom edge of the front framework there, and then also on the bottom of the hood. And then I am going to come in with my next shade, which is the B95, and begin to pull that darkest color out. So I'm coloring right over the top edge of that B97 with the B95, and then going up a little bit farther to kind of drag that darkest shade up with this mid-tone so that I get a nice smooth blend. And I'm just going to work my whole way around that. I also colored in around those little fog lights with the B95 because they're so tiny. I didn't want to keep working around them and possibly get some blue in there. So I just filled that in with the B95. Bring in my third shade, which is the B93. And you could probably use only 3 shades if you wanted to, but I like a lot of dynamics in my coloring, and to achieve that, you need to have deep dark shadows and then really light highlights. And because this is such a large image, it just really helps to have that 4th shade in there to kind of do that extra duty for whichever, the lighter or the darker. So if you only wanted to do 3, you could do the lightest 3, or you could do just the darkest 3, depending on how you wanted your car to look. But I filled in all of that white space with the B91, and I really do like how it turned out with all 4 of those shades mixed in. Next, I'm going to pull out some grays. I'm going to use C3, C5, C7, and C9. So I went with cool grays. And I'm going to start with the bumper. For the bumper, I'm only going to use the lightest 3 shades. So I'm starting with that C7 on both the left and the right, and then blending toward the center with the C5. And then I'll fill in the space underneath that novelty plate with the C3, and then I'm going to go to the C9 for my tires and my steering wheel and blend out with the C7, and then I'll use the C5. So I use the darkest 3 shades on both of those areas. So once I have that done, I am going to switch to some light yellow shades for the headlights and the fog lights. I wanted them to be really pale, so I pulled out Y000, Y000, and Y02. Just a touch of that Y02 first, blended it out with the Y000, and then I used the Y000 on the headlights. And then I'm going to use G94 and G99 for the sleeping bag that is rolled up. And I put the G99 in that little swirl and then blend it out with the G94. And I wanted to make that little swirl just a little bit darker, so I did go back in with some extra of the G94. And then I'm going to keep those 2 shades and then add in the G43 and color in my skinnier trees. The skinnier trees are from the Car Critters Christmas add-on, and I'll actually be coloring a few more of these off screen. I just stamped what there was room for on this page, and then I did a few additional on an extra page because I knew I was going to need a lot of trees for the scene that I had envisioned, but I didn't want to waste your time just coloring the same trees over and over and over. So I'll just do the 3 skinny ones in this combo. And I'm basically placing the G99 up at the very top and then under each section that is kind of separated by those scalloped lines. And then use the G94, and then the G43 is going to be the highlight. And I did do a second layer on all of the trees as well. And I think that really helped to improve that blend. That's something that I will often do, especially with really dark shades, which tend to be harder to get to blend. Not always, but a lot of the times I find that to be the case. So I'm going to do the other 2 trees at the same time now that I've kind of tested this combo on one and made sure that I liked how it turned out. I can just quickly do the other 2 at the same time. And I'm basically doing about a third of each section with that darkest shade, a third with the mid-tone, and then a third with the lightest shade. And then when I do my second layer, I don't take that third shade, the highlight, all the way down to cover and do 2 layers of that. I only take it about halfway, so it leaves one extra little section that only has that first layer of the lightest shade, which gives you a little bit extra of a highlight. And hopefully you'll see what I mean right here. I'm just not taking it all the way down into those scallops, stopping just short, so it gives me a little extra highlight on those little scalloped edges. Then I'm going to bring in a little pop of red using R24, R29, and R39, and I'm going to do the top of the cooler. Put the R39 down on the bottom edge, blend it up with the R29, and then use the R24 at the top. And then for the lower part of that, I used E000 and E00. Didn't quite like how that turned out, so I am going to add something else to it in just a minute, but I will use those shades on the white part of the fox on his face. And then I pulled out E42, E43, and E44. I threw in a little of that E42 on the lower part of that cooler or tackle box, whatever it is, while that ink was still wet. And then I used all 3 of those shades to do the trunks of my trees, including the larger trees. So for the smaller trees, I only used the E44 and the E43 because there wasn't a ton of room there. But on the larger trees, I did also add in that E42. And then I'm going to use these shades to color in my bear as well. Just adding a little bit of that E44 and then blending out with the E43, which started to leak on me. So I pulled the other cap off to equalize the pressure in the barrel and then blended out with the E42. For my fox, I'm going to use my favorite fox combo, which is YR12, YR14, and YR18. A little YR18 on the back of the head, on the under part of his arms, and the part of his body that is kind of shaded by the steering wheel, and then blend it out with the YR14, and then use a little YR12 for a highlight. And then I'm also going to do the roll there, the blanket or whatever that is that's kind of rolled up down at the bottom. I thought it would be nice to have another pop of orange since that way it'll tie in with one of the main characters of the scene. For the clasp of the little cooler, I use Y21 and Y26, and I'm also going to use that on the novelty license plate, which, by the way, you can stamp a variety of different sentiments in there. I just used the Gone Fishin' because I thought that suited the scene. I added some rosy cheeks to my critters with R21, and then I colored the map with B41 and B000, and I did add a little extra of that B41 down at the bottom. And then for my larger trees, I'm going to use G40, G43, and G46. So the G43 was my lightest on the other trees, but combined with this combo, they're going to look a little bit different. And that's what I was going for. I didn't want all of my trees to look exactly the same. I thought that could get kind of monotonous. There's already going to be a ton of green on this card because it is a woodland scene. So I just wanted to mix it up and have some different shades in there. So just like I did with the other trees, I did about a third of each of the sections with the darkest shade, the G46, starting up at the top, and then blended about a third of the way down with the G43, and then the bottom third was the G40. And you can see that with that first layer, you can really see the different sections of that. Some shades just need a second layer, and there's just no way around it, or your coloring isn't going to be as smooth as you may like. It's just the way the markers blend together. So that second layer does really, really help. And I did leave that in the video for today because I know a lot of times you guys like to see that transformation. It really does make a big difference. Once I get this first tree colored in here, then you can kind of compare the two. But I'm going to do that second layer, like I said, the second full layer of the G43, about a third of the space, and then that bottom layer I just will not go all the way down into the scallops. And you can see the difference between those two trees. The one on the left is much more blended than the one on the right. And by the way, this larger tree is from the Merry Mice stamp set. So I did use a couple of holiday stamp sets today, but I'm not making a holiday card. So it's just another way to stretch your stamps and kind of see what images are where and what can be used in different ways. So I'll finish up this second layer on this last tree, and then also the ones on the separate sheet off to the side, and then I'll trim all of the images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm taking a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface Cardstock and some Twisted Citron Distress Oxide Ink. And I'm going to just add a lot of that color up at the top part of this scene. The bottom part is going to be completely covered, so I wasn't really concerned about inking that up. Then I'm going to bring in some mowed lawn, and I'm going to bring that in from the top two corners and that top edge, and just darken that up a bit. Bring that into some of that Twisted Citron, and then I'll go back to the Twisted Citron blending tool and just work back and forth between those two until I have a look that I like. I just wanted like a soft glow. Then I'm going to take the Lawn Fawn Birch Tree stencil and hold that down in place and add in some Rustic Wilderness Distress Oxide ink. This stencil is fairly fiddly and it's pretty hard to hold down, so I do need to find another solution, either a spray adhesive or some kind of a sticky mat to attach it to if I want to continue using this, because this did not turn out perfectly. Luckily for me, on this particular card it didn't matter, because I'm going for more of a hazy, cloudy look. You can see that especially that third tree from the left really didn't turn out well at all, but it's really not going to be noticeable in the end card. So I'm going to bring in some more of that Rustic Wilderness on the outside edges and also some ground espresso. So I'm trying to create a scene that is deep in the woods and you're just seeing like these distant trees in the background because you're so deep in the woods, there's nothing but trees. And I wanted it to be really kind of hazy and foggy and shadowy. So I'm adding some ground espresso, I'm adding the Rustic Wilderness, and I even went back and added a little bit more of the Twisted Citron in the middle. Then I'm going to distress this even further by adding some water splatter, and I accidentally dripped a big blob over there on the right, but I am going to fix that in just a minute. But I splattered the rest of the background, blotted that up with a paper towel, and then I'll just go back in with my ground espresso ink blending tool and add the ink right back over that one spot. And in the final card you won't even notice it. I'm going to also splatter some of the Rustic Wilderness ink all over the background, just getting really fine drops by using that thin paintbrush and tapping it off the edge of the block. And I'm going to add some ground espresso to that as well, just splattering that all over the background. And once I am happy with how this is looking, I will set this panel aside to dry. In the meantime, I'm going to take a piece of Lawn Fawn Noble Fur cardstock and I die cut that with the simple stitched hillside borders. And then I'm going to add more of that ground espresso and rustic wilderness inks to that top edge to also make it look really shadowy and like we're deep in the forest. So I'm just layering both of those inks on top of each other on that top edge. That'll really help draw your eye to that stitching detail as well. And just make it really dark and moody. And then blend that out a little bit more. And then I'll set this piece aside to dry. Then I'm going to take the On the Road die set and trim the main piece out of Storm Cloud cardstock, the center piece out of Sticky Note, and the side pieces out of Dolphin cardstock. And then I will take a little bit of Black Soot Distress Oxide ink and just add that to the edges of the road to darken that up, just so everything has a little bit of dimension on the card. And just makes those edges really stand out. The very edges will be covered with that Dolphin cardstock, so I'm making sure to go in just a little bit and make it more hazy to kind of match the feel of everything else. Then I can assemble this piece, so I'm going to grab some liquid glue and turn that over, and I will add that liquid glue right on the sides of those little cutouts. And I'll place my sticky note piece right over top. And then I can flip that over and take the dolphin pieces. I decided to use dolphin rather than white because I thought the white might be just a little bit too bright for this scene. And the dolphin has just a little bit of like a little bit of a gray tone to it. So I'm going to add that on both the left and the right. Just lining that up with the stitching detail there so I know that I have those on at the same exact place on each side. And I use my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue because it gets behind all of those delicate little pieces. So once that is done, I'm going to go ahead and assemble the background. I'll take that Noble Fur piece that we ink blended on top and just glue that down to the background. And then I'm going to add the On the Road die cut right over top. I will say that I didn't quite measure my hill correctly. I made it a little bit too tall. It's not a huge deal because my car is going to cover the difference. But if you're not going to have your car like towards the top of it, you might want to make your hill a little bit shorter so it matches, so your road just doesn't run off into nothing. For the sentiment, I'm going to take another piece of sticky note and I'm going to stamp a sentiment from the Reveal Wheel sentiments. I'm just putting wishing you a wonderful birthday, and I'm stamping that in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And for some reason, the word wishing just kept coming out too dark. So I just kept turning that to a different portion and re-stamping that because I just didn't like the way it was looking. So I even flipped it over and stamped it a third time, and this time I just did not push down on the word wishing at all, and that turned out much better. I will also pop my card base in my MISTI, which is Lawn Fawn Craft cardstock, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment in walnut ink. And I'm using, the sentiment is also from Reveal Wheel Sentiments, and then the little bike is from the Car Critters Road Trip add-on. So now I can take that focal panel, that background, and add that to my card front. It's the same size, it's 5 1/4 wide by 4 1/2 tall, so it's an A2 standard card. So I'm just making sure that's on there really nice and straight, and then I can bring in my images. To attach my critters inside the car, I'm going to use some 1/8 of an inch double-sided tape. I just find that's the easiest way to get them adhered. And I'm going to do the same for the camping gear that is going on top. So I'm going to peel off the release paper for just the critters first, and then get those guys lined up how I want them. I had to adjust that fox a couple of times to make sure that he was in the correct position, and then I'll add the little bear holding the map right next to him, and then I'll peel off the release paper for the top piece and grab the camping gear, It's kind of buried in all those trees there. And I'm going to just line that up so that the bottom line is right below the car. And then I'll add some more liquid glue to the back of this whole piece with everybody attached. And just make sure that that is going to be nicely adhered. So I'm covering every little nook and cranny that I can. And then I'll line that up at the top of the road, so it did cover that gap between the road and the hill, and then press that down into place. It did pop up a little bit, but that was okay because I actually needed to slide these large trees back behind the car a little bit, so that actually worked to my advantage. I would have had to pull the car up a little bit anyway. So I'm going to work quickly and add the 2 large trees, one on either side, so it's nice and symmetrical. And then I will press that car back down into place. Then I'll take one of the smaller trees and I'll add one to the very left and one to the very right on that hill. So I just like things to be even. I don't know what it is about that. It just is really pleasing to my eye. So I often do try to make things really symmetrical, or if I don't, then I do it purposefully and try to balance it in different ways. But this card is going to be very symmetrical. So I'm just figuring out the position of the rest of my trees. I wanted this to be like a really dense forest. So I wanted to have lots and lots of trees, as many trees as I could reasonably fit on the card. So I ended up using 6 of the smaller, skinnier trees and 4 of the large trees. So I ended up with 1 extra large tree that I stamped and colored and then didn't end up using, but that's okay. It'll go in my dish of colored images and eventually end up on a different card. It'll be fine. But you know, when I'm laying out these card designs, I only have 1 of the large tree stamp and 1 of the skinny tree stamp. So I really have to guess at how many I will need in the final card. And if you're curious about how I come up with ideas for my cards and want to see that whole process, I do have videos on that on my channel, and hope to have more of those coming soon. But I did trim out that sentiment with one of the everyday sentiment strips, and I'm going to glue that down at the bottom of the steen. Just making sure that is lined up in the center. And because this is a masculine card, I decided not to add any other embellishment. I decided to leave it as is. And there is another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please leave me a comment down below. You can hit that like button as well to let me know. And make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already. All of the products I used today will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up something for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope that you had a good one, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.